Well, it was a couple years ago that Audrey and I were dating, and you laugh like it was only a couple years. You forget how young I am. It was only a couple years ago, and we were dating, and Audrey and I, when we started dating, we didn't want to date just to date. Like, we had an intention, and we had communicated that beforehand as we were friends, and just said, hey, if we're going to do this thing, like, there's the possibility of marriage at the end of the road. And so we knew that going in. So a little bit after we had been dating, Audrey hadn't met one of my best friends, my college roommate and his wife. And so we were taking a trip over to Klamath Falls, and we were going to meet them, and we were celebrating their birthday. And so we're headed over to meet them, and Audrey and I were there in the car, and I was like, oh, this is a perfect opportunity to have a DTR. A relationship conversation, all right? If you're not familiar with these conversations, it's the title of my message today, but it's Define the Relationship. A Define the Relationship conversation. They're that official talk in your relationship, where a romantic relationship, where you're kind of feeling out how interested are they in me really. So Audrey and I are headed to Klamath Falls, and I take this time to have this DTR with her. She doesn't know that we're having a talk, but I do. And so I say, hey, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? And all of 19 years old of her at the time was like, I see myself finishing my degree, getting a job, and just seeing where God takes me. That wasn't the answer I was looking for. So, and by the way, I'd said that in 30 seconds. It took her 45 minutes to take that, because I love my wife, but she has lots of words. And so it took 45 minutes to get that out of her. And so we get there, and I'm like, oh, this did not go exactly as planned. It was this moment that was, for us, it was a pivotal moment in our relationship. And these DTRs, or Define the Relationship conversations, are pivotal moments in any relationship. And so today we're in week 2 of our series called Reckless. We're looking at the life of Peter. And Peter, if you're not familiar, was one of the disciples of Jesus. Many believe that Peter was the leader of the disciples, of the 12 people that followed Jesus. And Peter, he was like many of us, right? Peter, he was a good old blue-collar guy. He had a fishing business with the family, and he was like a lot of us in many ways. But Peter, he was from Galilee. That's where the family business was at. And so he's up in Galilee with his family. And you know how when you come across somebody, you just know where they're at by how they talk? Right? Like Pastor Dave, you ever have a conversation with Pastor Dave, you know he's from Boston because the way he says weird, right? He just drops the R in half of the things that he says. It's weird how you weird stuff, right? Or like people that have the southern drawl, right? You know they're not from Alaska, right? Or people that they've got an English accent. Oh, great, you're from South America. You know where people are at based on the way that they speak. And sometimes it's not even the way they speak. Sometimes it's actually the way that they act, right? Well, Galileans were that way. You could tell a Galilean kind of by the way that they spoke, but you could tell a Galilean by the way that they acted. They were short-tempered. They were easily angered. They were hot-headed. They were a bit erratic at times. They were some unique people, and everybody knew what Galileans were, and Peter was no different. Peter was one of these guys. He was like us in many ways. Now, I don't know if you're like me, but every once in a while you might have a short temper, right? You might get a little hot-headed, maybe a little bit erratic. Maybe if you're like Peter or like me, sometimes you speak before thinking about what you should say, or maybe you act out a bit emotionally, right? This is the Galilean way of doing things. And so we can look at the life of Peter, and we can kind of put ourselves in his shoes at times. We can associate with Peter and how he operated. But I love this life of Peter, because while Peter in his early days was a bit erratic and just kind of crazy and known as one of those Galileans, Peter later, as he spent time with Jesus, was transformed by the redeeming power of Jesus and became the pillar on which the church of today was built upon. Jesus took Peter and transformed his life incredibly because Peter chose to live his life fully surrendered to Jesus. Last week we talked about Peter's faith and the faith that Peter had and the actions that went along with his faith as they were out there in this storm. They're in the middle of a boat, and Peter decides to take a step of faith by stepping out of the boat into the middle of the storm. And because he took that step of faith, Peter got to experience God like nobody else ever did. Peter was a unique guy. He took this step out into uncertainty, unpredictability. He took a step into discomfort. And because he was stepping out of his comfort zone, he was stretched. And because he was stretched, his faith grew tremendously in that moment, in that encounter that Peter had with Jesus. Well, today we find Jesus with his disciples, with Peter again, and they're having a define the relationship conversation. In Mark chapter 8, we pick up the story there. Jesus has just got done feeding 4,000 people, one of his other mass feedings. He's just got done healing a blind man, and here's Jesus having this define the relationship moment with his disciples. And in verse 27 of Mark chapter 8, it says, Jesus and his disciples left Galilee and went up to the village near Caesarea Philippi. As they were walking along, he asked them, "Who do people say I am?" Well, they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, others say you're one of the prophets." And then he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter replied, "You are the Messiah." But Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. And then Jesus began to tell them that the Son of Man must suffer many terrible things and be rejected by the elders, the leading priests, and the teachers of the religious law. He would be killed, but 3 days later he would rise from the dead. As he talked about this openly with his disciples, Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples and then reprimanded Peter. "Get away from me, Satan," he said. "You are seeing things merely from a human point of view and not from God's." Then calling the crowd to join his disciples, he said, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. Take up your cross and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your own soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my message in these adulterous and sinful days, the Son of Man will be ashamed of that person when he returns in glory, in the glory of his Father, with the holy angels." There's a whole lot happening here, and we're only going to unpack part of it today because there's just so much we can get into in this passage. But Jesus is here. They're up in Caesarea Philippi, which another reason is he did most of his ministry in Galilee. He goes up, gets away. He's done all this stuff, and he gets away to have this intentional time with his disciples. And while he's there, Peter confesses that Jesus is the Messiah. And this was good news for the Jews, right? The Jews had been waiting for the Messiah. They were waiting for this to come, and it's finally here. And they were expecting something different, though. They were expecting somebody who was going to come and set them free politically from the oppression of the Romans. They were expecting a king that would come and rightfully take his place like King David and make the nation of Israel a superpower again in the world. And yet Jesus comes and he is the Messiah, and he was none of those things. Jesus came and he wasn't what they were expecting. And so Jesus is here. He's having this conversation with his followers, and he asks them, "Well, what do people say about me?" "Well, you're a prophet, Elijah." He's like, no, okay. Who do you say that I am? Jesus gets really personal with his followers, with his disciples. He's asking for an explicit confession from them. He's not looking for something from somebody, an emotional response from somebody who has seen miracles like the many people that followed him around. He's looking for an explicit answer from the people that knew him the best. And he says, "Who do you, disciples, say that I am?" As in this moment, answering this question that Jesus asks, that Peter makes this gigantic statement when Peter says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of God." The Messiah is the anointed one, it translated out. He says, "It's you, Jesus." It was in that moment that the disciples finally realized and understood who Jesus really was. And so Jesus takes this moment, and as they understand in totality who Jesus was, he begins to teach them what was to come and what he was going to do with his life. And so Jesus, he begins to tell them, well, I'm going to die, and then I'm going to raise to life again 3 days later. And here comes our favorite Galilean, who acted emotionally, acted responsively. He comes up to Jesus, and he begins to reprimand Jesus. Like the King of Kings, he just said, "You are the Messiah, Jesus." And in the next breath, he's saying, "You can't say that stuff." Which one is it, Peter? Like, are you saying he's the Messiah, or are you trying to do your own thing? Because the reality, if you look at it, Peter wants Jesus to fit into his agenda in this moment. He wants Jesus to fit his agenda. He thought that he knew way more than Jesus did, and he knew that how Jesus should deal with being the Messiah. And so Peter begins to reshape and redefine who Jesus was supposed to be and how he would deal with the issue of sin. And too often, that's what American Christianity does. We try to fit Jesus into our own little mold that's comfortable for us. Give me a Jesus that I can control, one that I can make in my image and in my likeness that makes me comfortable. That's what I want. And what happens is we end up becoming fans of Jesus and not really followers of Jesus. Because followers don't live like fans. Followers don't live like fans. There's a lot of people that would say that they're followers of Jesus. But if we were really to define the relationship that they had with him, we would come to find out they're really more of fans. A fan can be described as basically an enthusiastic admirer. And Kyle Idleman writes in his book, Not a Fan, he says, "My concern is that many of our churches in America have gone from sanctuaries to becoming stadiums. And every week, all the fans come to the stadium where they cheer for Jesus, but have no interest in truly following him." He says they want to be close enough to Jesus to get all the benefits, but not actually so close that it requires anything from them. It's like a guy who's got a signed jersey from his favorite NFL player hanging up in his man cave, right? He knows all the stats. He knows every team that he played for professionally. He knows his college team. He knows his hometown. He knows all the stuff about this player, or maybe like a lady who loves a celebrity, a movie star. They know all the things about them, every movie they've played in. They know their height. They know their favorite food. They know what hair color they had to begin with, because they don't even know their hair color anymore. They know all these things about these people, but the reality is they don't actually know them. They're just fans of these people. And so, true to character, here's Peter. He expresses this concern of Jesus. You can't say this stuff, Jesus. One minute Peter's being led by God, and the next minute he's being called Satan. Like, the split that's taken place in Peter's life. One minute he's like on fire for God, and in the next breath he's hanging with Satan. Peter, where you stand? Where are you at? He says, God, you can't, this can't happen. It's like he was saying, God forbid this to happen. And without even knowing it, without even realizing it, Peter has attempted to stop Jesus' way to the cross and the great redemption plan that Jesus had. He's urging Jesus to be the Messiah of power, the Messiah of fame, the Messiah of sensation that everybody was waiting for, that big triumphant entry with all the stuff. He says, that's who you need to be, Jesus. Peter's urging Jesus to follow man's plan instead of God's way. And by doing that, he was tempting Jesus to compromise in the very same way that Satan in Matthew chapter 4 tempted Jesus out in the wilderness. He's tempting him with this fame. Jesus, be the Messiah of fame, be the Messiah of power, be the Messiah of sensation. And it's in this moment that Peter's recklessness costs him again. Peter's trying to go the easy route without even realizing it. And Jesus, he was not about to take Peter's fandom. Because he says in verse 33 of Mark 8, he says, Jesus turned around, looked at his disciples, and then reprimands Peter. He says, get away from me, Satan. Because you're seeing things merely from a human point of view and not from God's. There's a lot of people that claim to be followers of God, and yet many Christians are living like he doesn't exist. Craig Groeschel would call this Christian atheism. Believing in God, but living like he doesn't exist. And there's a lot of people that do that. They believe in God. They attend church when it's convenient. They attend church when the weather's nice outside. They're always there on Christmas and Easter. But here's what Jesus says about being a follower. He says, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. Take up your cross and follow me. He says, if you want to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake and for the sake of the good news, you will save it. To be a true follower of Jesus is hard. It is hard. It's not comfortable. It's not easy. It is a challenge, but it will stretch you and it will grow you. The thing is, too often in life, we look for glory without suffering. We look for glory without suffering instead of suffering transformed into glory. We're looking for glory without suffering instead of suffering transformed into glory, because that's uncomfortable. That's hard. That's challenging. To be a follower of Christ, you have to be willing to lose your life, to give it up for Christ's sake. There's a lot of people who claim to be Christians, but they don't want to give up their comfort. And C.S. Lewis is great when he writes this. He says, I didn't go to religion to make me happy. I always knew a bottle of port would do that. If you want religion to make you feel really comfortable, I certainly don't recommend Christianity. Now, if you're not familiar with C.S. Lewis, he was a devout follower of Jesus. And he says, hey, if you want comfortableness, don't become a Christian. If you want to live life in your little bubble, your comfort zone, where things are great, Christianity is probably not the thing for you. You look at Jesus and his life. Jesus had a lot of fans that were surrounding him. He had the religious teachers of his day. He had Pharisees that were surrounding him. All these people that taught the right things, but the actions did not follow the teachings. Jesus, he actually says in Matthew 23, he talks about those people who claim to be religious but don't live that way. He says, hey, do what they say, but don't do what they do, because they're very different things. Because actions tell you who someone is. Words tell you who they want to be. Actions tell you who someone really is, the way they act, the things they do. Words tell you who they hope to be one day. The old adage, actions speak louder than words, is the difference between a fan and a follower. The actions that we show. Peter says that Jesus was the Messiah, but he wasn't living like Jesus was the Messiah. There's a lot of fans in the Western church. As Titus would say, they claim to know God, but by their actions, they deny him. The things that they do, the way that they speak to other people, the way that they prioritize things in their life. They claim to follow Jesus, but you look at how they live, I'm not so sure about it. And many deny Christ. Jesus, he puts it this way in Matthew 7. He says, a good tree can't produce bad fruit, and a bad tree can't produce good fruit. So every tree that does not produce good fruit is chopped down and thrown into the fire. Yes, just as you can identify a tree by its fruit, so you can identify people by their actions. Not everyone who calls out to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only those who actually do the will of my Father. There are a lot of Jesus fans who will walk into a restaurant, bow their heads and pray, just in case somebody's looking. There's a lot of Jesus fans who won't go to R-rated movies in the theater, but they've got a slew of them stored up on their DVR. There's a lot of Jesus fans who may feed the hungry and may help the needy, but they'll make sure that you know about it for the next 2 weeks. There's a lot of Jesus fans who make sure that everybody sees them put their money in the offering basket as it goes by, but they haven't reached out to their neighbor who lost his job and is struggling to pay the bills. There's a lot of Jesus fans who like seeing other people fail because it makes them feel good about themselves and their relationship with Jesus. In 2004, the Olympics took place, and there was an Olympian named Matt Emmons. Matt Emmons was a rifle competitor. He was in the 50-meter, three-spot rifle event, three-position rifle event, and he was one shot away from winning the gold medal. He didn't even need to hit the bullseye to win the gold medal, and here he is. If the shot that he shot would have hit the target, it would have been an 8.1. It would have been enough points for him to win the gold medal. But what has been described as an extremely rare mistake in deep competition, Emmons fired at the wrong target. He was standing in lane 2, and he shot and fired at the target in lane 3. His score would have been good to win him a gold medal if he shot at the right target. But he shot at the wrong target and scored 0. And so instead of a gold medal, he walked away with 8th place because he was shooting at the wrong target. Can I tell you, this is a picture of what happens to a lot of fans of Jesus. If you ask them if they're followers or fans, they would be confident in their response as a follower of Jesus. It's not a question of their effort or their desires. The problem is it's not Jesus they're following. Without realizing it, they're aiming at the wrong target. When we learn to truly follow Jesus, it's what's on the inside. It's what's in our heart that matters. It doesn't matter what we say about things. It matters what's in our heart. Because here's the thing. People can tell you anything they want, but their actions will tell you everything. People can say anything they want, but the way they act proves it. It's not just lip service. It's heart. It's how we act. James says in James 1:22, he says, but don't just listen to God's word. You must do what it says. Otherwise, you are only fooling yourselves. In the very next chapter, he's a little more blunt. He says, in the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. He says, hey, you can have all the faith in Jesus you want, but if you don't do anything with it, it doesn't matter. You can be the biggest fan of Jesus you want to be, but if you're not following him, if you're not acting it, you're not living it out, if your life is not in service to him, then you're missing it. Mark Clark, in his book, The Problem of God, he says, if a person claims to love Jesus, but never actually tries to learn from him or live the way he taught, it's hard to take that claim seriously. He says, the writer of James says that even demons know God exists. They have faith, but faith doesn't save them. He goes on to say, this is a warning to all who claim to be Christians. Our beliefs must be coupled with lives that are God-honoring. He says true Christians, true followers, can't be separated from the evidence of the fruit in their lives. Let's play this out in a real-life scenario for just a moment, right? Imagine with me that you're having a define the relationship moment with a significant other, right? You're there asking if they're going to be committed to you for the rest of your life, and you tell them, man, I am committed to you wholeheartedly. You're the one that I want. Like, I want to be with you. I want to do life with you forever. And they're like, man, I love you too. I'm committed to you. But I've got one little condition. This condition is I want to be able to see other people still. This is what fans say to Jesus. They say, I love you. I'm committed to you. But let's not be exclusive. I'm going to leave my options open. God says, I don't want to be one of many. I want to be the one and only. I want to be the one and only in your life. Christianity, it's not good advice to help people lead moral lives. It's good news about who Jesus is and what he did. And churches are filled with people every Sunday who attend church. They don't say bad words. They don't watch bad movies. They give regularly. And yet those same people don't actually know, love, or walk with God at all. They've simply adopted a cultural Christianity. They're simply just fans of Jesus. Christianity, it has a point of surrender. Jesus says, come and follow me. It has that point of surrender, that decision that we have to make, followed by a practice of surrender. When Jesus says, deny yourself and take up your cross. We're not carrying our cross as an act of salvation, but a testimony of our inability to save ourselves. Jesus, he carried his cross for our salvation. We carry our cross because we're saved. Jesus died on the cross for our sins. We carry the cross to die to ourselves. There are those who, as Craig Groeschel puts it, believe in God and the gospel of Christ enough to benefit from it, and those who believe in God and the gospel of Christ enough to give their lives for it. The question remains, though, do you believe in God and live your life like he doesn't exist? Are you what some would call a Christian atheist? Are you a fan or a follower? Because a follower goes with Jesus whenever he leads, wherever he leads, no matter the cost. C.S. Lewis, he writes in his book, Mere Christianity, he says, the more we get to know, the more we get what we know, now call ourselves out of the way and let him, Jesus, take us over, the more truly ourselves we become. The more we get what we know, now call ourselves out of the way and let him take us over, the more we truly become ourselves. When we die to self, that's when we're most truly alive in Christ. When we give up our lives for Christ's sake, that's when we find the life that we were hoping for is available to us. We get what we truly are looking for when we surrender our lives to Jesus. When we become followers, true followers of him, not just fans, not just enthusiastic admirers, but when we truly say, yes, Jesus. I'm denying my personal comfort, my personal security, and I'm giving my life for you. Because that's what a follower of Jesus does. So it's time for us as a church to define our relationship with Christ. Are we fans or are we followers? Are we committed to following Jesus? Are we going to do what we say? Are our actions going to represent Jesus and represent our followership in him? Or are we just going to be giving lip service? Because it's either lip service or life service. That's what you can do. Are you going to give your life to follow Jesus and let him transform you? Because the life that you're looking for, the joy that you're looking for, the hope that you're looking for, the peace that you're looking for, the freedom you're looking for, the freedom from shame, the freedom from guilt, the freedom from your past, all of it is available when you say yes to following Jesus. And you let go of being a fan and you follow him. But we have to make the choice. Would you pray with me?